Hey, and welcome back. Before we implement our sign-in feature, let's look at our current logic, which is in our app.js file. As you can see, there's a piece of state that we define to false, and that is logged in. And technically this will still work, and all we have to do is pass the is logged in state down to all the children component as prop. So currently the complexity of our app is very straightforward, where we have two main layouts and a few components that make up those layouts. So passing down state as prop would not be too cumbersome, but if you can imagine, as we want to build more feature on top of the app, there will be more layouts and components. So basically it's not ideal to keep passing down prop from parent to children. So currently there are two better workflows that we can implement, and the first one is Redux. So Redux is a third-party package that helps us manage our state for the entire app. And the second one is natively in React and is a combination of using context and reducers. So in this series, we are focusing on the second option, which is context and reducer. And with that being said, I want to break down this workflow for you. So I will create a new file. You don't have to follow along if you don't want to. And this will be a JavaScript file. So most of us are familiar with this use state. And we would define something like const data set data equal use state. And then we would define some initial state. So const initial state to something like name and then email, and then we will pass this in as our state. So data is our state, and then to change the state we will use set data. So similarly, context and reducer does the same thing but for the entire app. So context is like our data, and if we want to change the state in that data, we will use a reducer. Alright, with this out of the way, let's set up this workflow. I will close this file and then open the sidebar. Now locate this source folder. And we want to create a new folder called context. And within the context folder, we're going to create two new files. The first being auth-context.js, and then the next one will be auth-reducer.js. Let's close the sidebar and work on our auth-context first. So the first thing we want to do is import something called create context from React. And then next we want to define the initial state. So const initial underscore state, and this will be an object. First, we will have our user, which will be a blank array. And inside this array will be our user data, like their name, avatar, and email. Next, we will have our is logged in state, and we will set that to false. Next, we will have our token, which is the access token. Now we want to export this out. So export const auth context equal create context, and then we want to pass in the initial state. Now let's jump into our auth reducer. Let's say const auth reducer. This will be an arrow function, and inside we will take in the state param and also action. So there are different actions we can do in this auth reducer, and we will use a switch for that, which define our different action type. And our first type will be a case of sign in, and we want to return the state. So we're going to spread that out and change is logged in to true. Next, we will have our second case, and it will be get underscore token. And once again, we want to return the spread out state, and we will get the token from the action payload. Our third case will be get user, and then return the state, and then our user data, which will be in the action payload also. Our fourth case will be update underscore avatar. So return state, And then inside our user array, we want to target the avatar and pass in our action payload. And then our last case will be sign out, return state. We want to say is logged in will be false. We also want to remove the token and set that back to an empty string. And then also our user will be an empty array. I will scroll up. Next, we are required to have a default. And let's just return the state. Alright, now we want to export out this file. So export default auth reducer. Give this a quick save. And now navigate back to our auth context. Next, we want to combine our auth context and reducer together. And we do that by having a provider. Let me show you what I mean. So let's go ahead and export this out. And then const, let's say auth context provider. It will be an arrow function. And inside we will take in the children prop. Because we want all of our components to have access to the data and the ability to change those data. Next, inside the function, we want to say const. We will get the state and then dispatch. And this will be our use reducer. I will tap that and it will auto import. And then we want to use our auth reducer and the initial state. Next, we want to return this in a provider. So let's say auth context dot provider. And then inside we want to pass in our children prop. Now all of our components were able to use the state and the reducer. Next, inside the provider, we will need to use the value prop. So value, and now we will pass in the state. So user state dot user is logged in will be state is logged in, and then the token will be state token, and then our reducer action, which will be our dispatch. Now give this a quick save. Next, we want to navigate to our index.js file. First, we want to import in our auth context provider. So auth context provider, and it is from our context folder, and then our auth context.js file. Next, we want to wrap this around our app. So auth context provider, and then wrap it around our app and give this a quick save. And then in order to test this out, let's jump into our app.js file. First, we will need to import in our auth context. This whole our global state, and it is from our context folder, and then auth context. Next, we want to go down here and remove this line, and then say const is logged in is equal to use context. So I will tap that and it will auto import, and then use context will use our auth context. Alright, now let's give this a quick save. So by default, the global state of is logged in is false. So if it is false, our app will render out the auth layout. So now if we visit our front end, it will still render out the auth layout. So let's check that out. And here it is, everything is working as it's supposed to. And this will also wrap up the lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.